By and large, the way people put together the delivery process is by gut and instinct. So how do you go up from there? I think the next step up from there is to use the data that comes out of the system to help you make the right decisions. When I say data-driven DevOps, I mean like don't rely on this human experience and let the system tell you. We should be able to find that kind of information from data.
Hey everyone, my name is Henry Suryawirawan, and you're listening to the Tech Lead Journal, the show where I'll be bringing you the greatest technical leaders, practitioners, and thought leaders in the industry to discuss about their journey, ideas, and practices that we all can learn and apply to build a highly performing technical team and to make an impact in your personal work. So let's dive into our journal. Hello everyone, this is Henry Suryawirawan. I'm back here again with a new episode of the Tech Lead Journal podcast. Thanks for tuning in and spending your time with me today listening to this episode. If you haven't, please subscribe to the Tech Lead Journal on your favorite podcast apps and also follow Tech Lead Journal's social media channels on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you'd like to make some contribution to the show and support the creation of this podcast, please subscribe as a patron at techleadjournal.dev/patron and help me towards producing great content every week. For today's episode, I am very happy to share my conversation with Kohsuke Kawaguchi. Many of you would have heard his name before, as he is widely known as the creator of the famous Jenkins CI, the most popular CI/CD tool used by millions of developers. And I guess it's still the leading CI/CD tool by a mile. I personally have always wanted to have a chance to speak and interact with Kohsuke, as Jenkins has always been one of my favorite developer tools since a long time ago when I started my career. After his stint at CloudBees, Kohsuke is currently the co-CEO and co-founder of Launchable, a test recommendation engine that uses machine learning to speed up CI pipelines by selecting the right tests to run at the right stage of your development workflow. In this episode, Kohsuke shared about data-driven DevOps, how to improve developers' productivity, the future of software testing, and why he created Launchable to help us move closer to achieve those things. In the beginning of the episode, you can hear from Kohsuke his story on how he created Hudson during his time at Sun Microsystems to solve his own problem of frequently breaking the build. I mean, who never breaks the build, right? Which eventually led to become Jenkins. And the rest, many of us know, is history. It was really a fun and great conversation with Kohsuke, and I hope that many of you could also benefit from this episode. If you like it, leave this episode a rating, a review, or comment on your podcast app or social media channels. Those reviews and comments are one of the best ways to help me get this podcast to reach more listeners, and hopefully they can also benefit from the contents in this podcast. So let's get this episode started right after our sponsor message. Are you looking for a new cool swag? Tech Lead Journal now offers you some swags that you can purchase online. These swags are printed on demand based on your preference and will be delivered safely to you all over the world where shipping is available. Check out all the cool swags available by visiting techleadjournal.dev/shop. And don't forget to brag yourself once you receive any of those swags. Hey everyone, welcome back to another new episode of the Tech Lead Journal podcast. Today's guest, I'm so excited. I'm sure most of you would have been familiar with his name. He is actually Kohsuke Kawaguchi, one of the most popular figure in the tech industry, I would say. If you ever use the CI server, which is Jenkins, I'm sure you know Kohsuke. He is the creator of it. When he was working with Sun, it used to be called Hudson. And then because of a few reasons, then it became Jenkins as a fork of open source project. And then Kohsuke fronted it and became one of the most popular, if still not the most popular CI server available in the market today. Kohsuke also used to be the CTO of CloudBees, the company that runs behind the Jenkins that is supported for the enterprise, and also won few awards, O'Reilly Open Source Award, Java 1 Rockstar Award, Rakuten Award, and things like that. So he's very famous. In this time, Kohsuke is actually launching his new company and product, which is called Launchable. I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about it later on. So Kohsuke, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, thank you very much. I think you give me more credit than I deserve. Thank you for that.
Yeah, actually, you are one of the person that I would like to have a chat because few years ago, this could be even decades ago, right? I was so stunned by the Jenkins CI server. So
Mm,
I was always wondering why this person is creating this project. It's so cool and it's free. So during that time when I started my career, it was really, really cool. So really happy to have you here in the show.
Thank you.
So Kosuke, maybe before we start, we would like to hear more from you about your career journey. So of course, there are so many highlights, but maybe in short, if you are able to maybe summarize your career journey so far, what are the turning points and maybe major highlights for you personally?
Yeah, so I grew up in Tokyo, that's where I picked up programming. And then I think by high school, I started selling software, made the operation a little bit bigger in the college. And then after I graduated, I kind of got involved in this schema language for XML. I guess the picture that I want people to have in their head is like, it's almost like a Star Wars movie. So there's like a standard body called WCC. It's like they're building a Death Star. So they're the Imperial Force. All the vendors that you've heard of. And there are this small bunch of idiots that are coming together. They have different ideas of how to define schema language for XML. So they're like rebel forces. And I kind of got recruited into that rebel force side and I started working on it. And because of that relation, I landed in California to work for Sun Microsystems. I kept doing XML stuff a little bit. Eventually, the rebel lost. I mean, that's how it always works, right? The empire wins. And then I started working more on the Java Enterprise editions, and that's when I started working on this software you mentioned that eventually became Jenkins. But the Sun as a company kept going down. Their business wasn't doing very well. So I think it was 9 or 10-ish. It got acquired by Oracle. So I experienced 3 months of Oracle, and then I left. By then, Hudson was doing pretty well. So I thought, okay, let's see what I can do with it. So I created a company that became CloudBees. Yeah, we had a lot of fun, and that lasted until 2010. That's where I had the opportunity to learn as a CTO. And it was really my first experience at startup. So that was a lot of fun. And then in, I guess, 2019, so shortly before the whole pandemic happened, I launched another company. And then that's where I'm working day in, day out from this little office in California. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. It's pretty interesting that the way you were working initially on schema language. So tell us more, like how did you end up working with Hudson during
Right.
that time? Initially it was called Hudson because CI was, I think, probably still in the early stage. I think there was probably one other CI server available, which is called Cruise Control. What was the intention behind Hudson?
So around that time, Sun was a big company, and in a big company, people don't seem to be working as hard as, let's say, they are in small companies. So they show up to the office, I don't know, 9, 10 a.m. And then like by 6 p.m., the office is completely deserted. So that was unthinkable from where I originally came from. In other words, I had a lot of time. And then I really enjoyed writing programs. So like I had a lot of open source projects going on at that time. Hundreds of them probably. In fact, I had this blog series called Project of the Day, and I often created like a one little library here and there a day and posted those. But there are a few other motivations. So one was that I mentioned that I was working for Java Enterprise Edition Group. That's a middleware that Sun was creating. It's a standard so that the other people can build application on top of it. It's a platform, right? And I realized like one day I looked around and nobody might be too strong a statement, but most of the people who are working on producing that platform was not actually using that platform to do anything. So that seemed like to go against this like a dog fooding principle. So I felt like, okay, I gotta write some app to use the stuff that our team produces to see if it's any good. Back then, my day job was XML. I was engineering this like a 4 people or so team. And I used to be known as a guy who breaks builds because I failed to commit some changes here and there. And then next time somebody updates their workspace, like things don't even compile. So they do a little bit of digging and pick up a phone and call me. Hey, you touched this file last time and it doesn't seem to compile. So like, can you check what's going on? And sure enough, like my change wasn't fully complete. So that was embarrassing. At some point, I got to fix that. So I thought, okay, let's write some program that do that so that it catches my mistake before my colleagues. And then it just so happens that there was this CI software written in, I think in Ruby or maybe Python. But I really liked the way it looked, so I started using it, but it didn't scale. So the moment I started putting a little bit more workload, it started to crumble. So I thought, okay, maybe I can write this. So that's kind of how it started.
Wow, it's really interesting because it started as a personal project to help you to avoid embarrassment of breaking the build.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
actually, the
so,
concept of CI itself is to actually detect that early so that people either can revert or fix
right.
the build, so to speak. So then, once it becomes Jenkins, what was your contribution in order to make it such a successful project? So why
Mhm.
people are picking it up massively?
Sure. So in the beginning, like I was the only user, and that went on for like I think almost 2 years. I was using it in my team, and by the way, like I discovered that I wasn't the only guy who's breaking deals all the time. Everybody else in the team did. I just didn't even notice those. So that was useful, and then they kept giving me this feedback. So maybe you can do this and that, and that was really encouraging for me. So that kept me going. By then, I knew like I have this theory about what makes this thriving open source project. And in my mind, that is to kind of get out of people's way. So in other words, often people who want to participate in open source project has clear idea of what they want to do, like the direction in which they want to take this project. What's really painful is to convince other people, especially the existing contributors in the project, so that they buy into the idea, especially the bigger changes or unproven changes. As a general rule of thumb, developers are more interested in just doing things and convincing other people that doing this is the right thing. So I thought if we can create this almost like a technical architecture that enables people to experiment on their own and then build things on top of Jenkins, collectively as a whole, it still looks like Jenkins. And then if we build a supporting social structures so that the people are incentivized to bring those pieces together into one place and kind of collaborate in some limited degree, so they still get to act as the kings when it comes to their plugins. Collectively, like we need to move to certain direction. So I implemented that, and it has a technical part, like I mentioned, but also has a social part. That to me is maybe like the key contributions. And then all sorts of people started writing those. I was no longer writing a CI system. I was writing a platform that allowed other people to write the CI systems. So that's how it kind of grew.
So, in terms of the current DevOps CI/CD landscape, what's your view on this? Actually, your personal view, because it has grown so much since that day.
Right.
There are so many CI or CI/CD tools available these days. Some are popular, some are like open source, some are commercial. So, what's your view on the current CI/CD DevOps landscape?
Yeah. So one thing that I found interesting was when I originally did Jenkins, one key role that it functioned was as a place for the collective truth. So in other words, like it was used as a means for people in the team to be on the same page about the state of things. Did this change successfully land? Is this test passing or failing? Now that you think, I mean, in 2020, 21, talking about these things is like crazy. But back then, like these things involve phone calls and emails and stuff. That's often there's the time delays and stuff like that that made it difficult for people to agree whether this problem that they were seeing yesterday has already been fixed or not. So in that sense, like the CI server was very much visible. It's almost like a billboard that the people would go to see. And then I think over the last 10 years, it's sort of like completely flipped in the other directions. Nowadays, if you feel like it's almost completely invisible, maybe the only interaction people have with it is when their pull request gets this like green check mark to be good to go or not. Yeah, so that was a surprising change for me. So from there, I think about two things. The one is that when it's invisible, you can go up a lot more in the complexity, sophistication. So to me, this is actually an opportunity. When people need to understand like what those things being there means, you can't really go too far. It's like an automatic transmission in a car. Like it still makes you feel like there's a distinct gears that you'd be shifting, but when this technology innovation happens, like a continuous variable transmission, completely get rid of the notion of the gear. So when you're automated, you can take on this like a next level of like evolution. And that's something I think about a lot. That's part of the like what eventually became into Launchable. Another part of it is I think there needs to be a little bit more on the pushback, like a swinging back onto serving useful information to the developers. So the reason you're running these CI processes so that it catches something and then informs developer to work on something. And then when that's reduced to just basically like a one bit information, I think there's a lot of opportunities lost. I think there's an opportunity for us to do things better. And that's where I see the CI system currently.
Yeah, I agree. Like CI server currently is more like a transparent system. Hopefully, everyone has been running CI server for building their software, and it became part of the norm, I would say, in terms of software development. I think one of your passion is actually about developer productivity, right? So in your view, what is the productivity?
Yeah, so I'm thinking mainly from the angle of if I'm a leader of a team, then I'm thinking about, I have a set of people with different skill set and different level of experience and sophistications, and I need to rise all the boat, make everybody a little bit more productive. So arm them with more something, like more information, more power. So that's the angle that I'm thinking about. Eventually, like Hudson became one of the key driver for me. So that was not how I started it. But as it got used inside the organizations, I started thinking, oh, so what this is doing is it's helping junior engineers to be more effective. Just a little bit. And it's not like this one software is going to make them twice as valuable. But I have my own little contribution going there. So that became like an important part. Another way I think of this is, in the movie Alien, who's the lady?
Sigourney Weaver?
Yeah. So she rides into this power loader and then she fights with the alien. So I think of those, like what the CI system or this DevOps in general is doing is that kind of like arming the humans, like amplifying their muscle with some machine power. So it's almost like an exoskeleton, how to do more with the less. That's, I think, is what I think about the developer productivity. And we are just basically trying to create more seat belts because like we can turn out the changes as fast as we want if we don't care about whether it works or not. And then it's like an everlasting challenge. I mean, testing is a part of it, but it's also just one part of it. And there's so many other layers that we rely on to build confidence to the change. That's kind of developer productivity.
Yeah, actually, I like the second angle. I wasn't thinking it that way. So creating seat belts or maybe guardrails so that you are also productive but effective. It's not like productive as in like churning a lot of outputs, but also the right output. So I like that definitely. So as a developer, maybe from your point of view, because you have written so many code in open source project, how should one be conscious about improving their developer productivity? We talk about enterprise with CI server and things like that, but how as individual we should be conscious about improving our productivity?
Yeah, so when you frame it like that, productivity as an individual, it almost feels like how can you grow or like how can you become a better engineer? I mean, I can talk about that, but before I get there, I guess in more like a narrowly this developer productivity, as I discussed in terms of like, given the same person, how can we do more? I think the kind of key thing for me is demand that you be armed. Demand to your boss and the organization that you need an exoskeleton, the power loader. I guess like we have these tendencies, and I did to build my own tooling. We know because we can, and it's fun to do it. We tend to just prefer to roll our own instead of spending money. Those money that we are spending is not even our own, right? So, but I've been a long time user of IntelliJ because one of my hero programmer was using it, and that's how I picked it up. I think it was like $400 per seat or something back then. And I thought, gosh, this is so expensive. It's ridiculous. So I refused to spend money on it. But then like later I became CTO and like salespeople. Look at salespeople. Every one of them spend $150 a month to Salesforce to get anything done. Our IDE is $400 for perpetual license back then. I mean, right now I think they changed its subscription, but back then you just pay once and then be done. I was so cheap I didn't even want to do it. So that to me is like, that's silly. So I learned a lot by writing code, maybe more so by looking it back in a few years later and okay, which ones worked out, which ones didn't. So there's definitely like the value in time testing things. More generally, I think it's the idea of retrospecting. When you do it with some intentionality, do it with some hypothesis. I'm going to do it this way this time because I think of X, Y, and Z. Normally, often people don't think about those things and they just do it because they feel like it. Without those theories and hypotheses and retrospecting, it's difficult to learn from how you did it. So to me, that's the key thing. Like intentionally trying a different API design style, like did that work? Or like a working backward. What are the assumptions that I made in doing it this way? Did it actually hold or not? So somewhat like a mindset almost. I think that's important. So another thing, more often than not, in the context of work, the engineering work is more like a finding the right balance or compromise. We don't want to waste quote unquote waste like 2 hours looking into something deep and you can band-aid the program in 15 minutes. So that balancing act is an important skill. But I also find it useful from time to time, just go deep dive. You decide to solve the problem the hard way and then go solve it. In some sense, I think it kind of grows the muscle. Sometimes there's no easy way out and you have to go straight, really, like no matter what the obstacle is. Being able to do that when you need to, I think that's really powerful. I'm sure we all have this feeling of we spend 3 hours debugging and eventually we only find like a one line that needs to be changed. Not always, but from time to time, I think it's a good thing. Finally, I think the communication and influencing others. Back then, when I started working for Sun, the programming are much more individual activities. We literally had this whole system kind of split it up in like 2 or 3 ways, and different people generally, quote unquote, own different parts. They did the thing the way they wanted. Around the interface, we talked about how to do things, but that was it. But now it's a lot more collaborative activities. So I think the communication skills in the engineering become far more important.
So thanks for sharing your personal view on this. I'm sure the reason why you launched Launchable is also partly to improve this developer productivity. So you mentioned something about testing, and Launchable is actually some kind of like a tooling arm with machine learning model in order to be able to predict something. So maybe you can share a little bit more. What is Launchable, especially for people who haven't heard about it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to start with what we do today in terms of functional software and then where I'm trying to go, because the latter is much bigger than the former. So I was working on this Jenkins project. It's the project that's been alive for a long time. We have, 18,000 or so test cases. Every time I make one line change, I have to wait for 1 whole hour for all the tests to pass. And then somebody comes in for code review. Maybe he doesn't like the variable name. We make some changes. And then another whole hour of testing cycle before I can run this change into the master branch. I find that quite painful. It's a good thing to have a lot of tests, but if I'm changing a small part in a large system, then I don't think running all the tests are actually particularly meaningful. There should be a smaller subset of the tests that would be pretty effective in catching any regressions that I might cause. That's the reason we have a smoke test. The idea of the smoke test is you have a big test suite that takes like hours to run. So let's create like a really small subset. And if power it on, if any of these tests fail, then it's probably not even worth the full test. So that's another way of saying, okay, sometimes a subset is useful. Now, smoke test is usually like a fixed, manually curated set of tests. Actually, if you think about it, it's not probably very optimal. So one way to think about what Launchable is doing is, so we look at the changes that the people have applied, created, and then we look at all the tests that you have. And then we make a prediction that, okay, for these changes, you should be running these tests in this order to maximize the chance that you get the failure right away, right off the gate. And then depending on where you use it, that can be used differently. If you're using it for the pull request, then what that means is the chances of you getting the failure right after gate, right after creating a pull request goes up. So you don't have to context switch into something else. You can immediately start working on the fix and then push another change. And then work on it a lot more quickly, iterate on it a lot more quickly. In other places, I mentioned like a 1 hour test is bad, but in actual real world software projects, 1 hour test could be actually awesome. I've seen a full cycle test, it's going to take 7 days. It's ridiculous. So imagine like you find one bug and you got to fix it. And like you need to rerun the whole test cycle again. Like you can't even do it. And then those are still happening. I'm sure like a lot of audience knows the project just like that. So like in those places, imagine if you can tell people like, okay, these are the tests. In order to get 95% of confidence that this test change is regression free, maybe you only need to run like a 15%. And we can be precise about these things. And that's what we do in terms of that. And so now if I may step on to where that's going to lead to, this is in some sense just one quote unquote minor optimizations. And I like this optimization because it's a personally painful thing for me, and I know a lot of people suffer from it. But I think of it, I guess, essentially like a self-tuning delivery cycle. Like I talked about how the stick shift evolved into automatic transmission, into continuous variable transmission that doesn't even have a gear ratio. I think it's something similar. If you have this automation process going all the time, producing data and behaviors, then the system itself should be able to use those information. First, to kind of inform people better. And then second, to make the whole delivery pipeline self-tuning. I'll give you some example. We talked about this, 1 bit of information from the CI system you get. Something failed. And then so if something failed, what are you going to do? You click the link and look at how it failed. You have 5 failed test cases. Now, what you want to know, okay, so 3 of these failures are actually known to be a flaky test. Who doesn't have a flaky test problem? So if somebody can tell you that, by the way, these 3 failures probably not worth paying attention to because they fail the same way, left and right. But these other 2 are more interesting because those are new. So those are an example of contextual information. And then those are a little bit small ways that makes you productive. So you make some changes and you break a massive 24 different test cases because you updated the system. You need to update the test code. And they kind of begrudgingly do it because we all feel naked about the quality, right? So who am I to throw away the test? But are all these test cases actually really useful? We kind of amass them over time. I mean, I don't even know what this test case testing is. I'm just going to tweak the session to make it pass. When you add more tests down the road, maybe are they overlapping? So there should be some critical eyes to, let's say, the return on investment. Every test case incurs some cost in terms of the execution time, in terms of the maintenance and all that. So is it actually producing enough value to justify that cost? And we should be able to get those information from the system itself that we don't today. That's kind of the contextual information I'm talking about. Now, if you look at the whole delivery pipeline, it's not even just one set of test suites. You have a different test suites, or maybe sometimes you have a different branch merging strategies, all designs. Those are the seat belts that we talked about. In some small teams, a naive thing is everybody is creating a pull request and they get tested and land into the master. In a larger team, it actually breaks down. So they need to have team level integration branch in which changes are landing and then a second level of integration. I've seen those places. And then there are tests, unit tests that run quickly, so you can run it very close to the left side of the development cycle, very close to where the coaching happens. Some of the integration tests can only run much later because it takes 5 hours to run. You can only run it every night. So all these pieces, the build guy is going to go in and, okay, we're going to do it this way. I'm going to put this test here to run it every night or maybe every week or something. And then that's it. And once that's in place, it stays for years because nobody dares to touch it. But of course, as the project becomes bigger or changes, what's the optimal strategy to do the merging or where to run the test actually should change. So we run it every day. Is it better to run it every day or is it better to run it every 2 days so that we have extra cycle that can be used to run different kind of tests? Now, what's optimal? So people are not actually intentionally making those decisions. And so the step one, if you can make those decisions data-driven at least, and then if you can further step up that decision, leave those decisions to machines, now that's the word that I want to get to.
So I can definitely relate to some of the problems that you mentioned. One line change, worse right? If it's just it's a string, right? It's it's harmless, a string on a label or something. And you run through the whole cycle of the build and you wait for that until it finishes. Only then, of course, you are sure that it will pass anyway. So I understand all these things that you mentioned, but how do you integrate Launchable? Where exactly that Launchable is actually triggered and how does it help over the time to actually make this kind of prediction or judgment for you to tweak and then what you should do afterwards? Maybe you can explain a little bit on that side.
Yeah, so the key to make it universally useful is to reduce the intrusion as much as possible. So make the surgery as small as possible. Because I know how scary for some people to modify this a delivery pipeline. It could feel like a snowflake. So we created this a very small open source command line tool, and that's your agent. And then the first thing you do is when you're building a binary, you're going to tell us, okay, here's the source code. That's what I'm going to turn into build. So otherwise known as build of materials. What went into this program? Like a git commit, basically. And then at some later point, when you run the tests, you're going to tell us, okay, these are the 15,000 test cases I'm thinking about running. And the software that I'm going to test this build allows us to kind of point that back to the earlier build of materials. And then we're going to tell you, okay, so in that case, another parameter is what's your goal? So maybe you tell us, let's create a 20-minute subset of the tests. or there are different ways to specify a role. And then we're going to say, okay, so in that case, run the test number 1, 5, 7, and 20, and blah, blah, blah. And then we give it in the form that's very easy to pass into the test runner. We might be using, I don't know, like a Maven or a Node, or like every programming language has multiple test runners. So like it's incredible number of those. But usually these test tools are capable of receiving what test to run because the developer needs it interactively. So we use that mechanism to controlling the subset of the test. And then after everything is said and done, we need to see how those tests have behaved. So you point us to these test reports, like usually JUnit files, this de facto standard XML report format. And then we look at those to see, oh, okay, this test has run and took a 1.5 second, this failed, and that, blah, blah, blah. And then we like slurp those information on the other side of the internet on our side, and we crunch those numbers to figure out. Tomorrow, our brain would be a little better so that we can make a little better prediction. That's how it works.
You mentioned about language and testing framework. Is this tool language specific, like tied to a specific programming language? For example, we have also multiple layers of tests, just like you mentioned. You have unit tests, functional tests, maybe UI tests, security tests, performance tests. Can this be tool used for all those tests as well?
So no, it does not depend on any programming language. And yes, it can be used with any tests. So quite intentionally, I decided that at least right now, I'm not going to look into what's the source code and how it's structured. There are some tools and some approaches in which people parse this, let's say, the Java programming, Java source code, and build the syntax tree and try to do this almost like a code analysis-based approach or the code coverage-based approach. But that's going to, as I said, naturally make it a programming language. We have this incredible diversity of how we do things. It's actually a problem. It's really a problem, but that's the reality. So I wanted to make this universally applicable because, quality problem is universal. And then the flip side of it is I think it's missing some, I'm failing to exploit some performance efficiency that the machine learning can do. But right now, frankly, squeezing the remaining last 5% of the performance isn't my concern. I think it's the idea that something like this is useful, that we should be leaving more control to the machines. That's the idea that we need to educate people and people need to pick up. So that's where we stand. And then same thing about the phase of testing. You're right, we do anything from unit testing to API testing to UI testing to whatnot. So the general idea is you have this thing you're testing that can be attributed to a set of source code, the bill of materials. And then you have this thing called something that runs against it and produces a binary result, pass or fail. Then we can fit into this mold. So that's what we do. Like a unit test, for example, people tend to run that a lot. So that produces a lot of data. And more data tends to lead to a better model. So I'm seeing different performance. But then that is also true from one project to another. Right now, you can take this to anything. And then let's see what it does in your project.
I mean, certainly it will work nicely with the software that has a lot of tests. But what if the software has very little tests? I'm sure there are many software these days that don't have enough test coverage.
Yeah, so there's a whole other area of quality effort, as you said, focused on automating tests. I'm not in that fight. Automating is hard, so I expect that to continue. But it's also, the automation is a very fragmented field. Like in the browser, automation requires one thing. Mobile automation, it's a wholly different game. And then if you're trying to automate the testing of video games, it's entirely another thing, and then so on and so forth. So again, it's really hard to build anything universal in that space. Yeah, so I leave that fight to these people. And then when you start to accumulate more tests, now you have a different problem. And then that's where we can help you.
Right. I'm sure you have a number of customers who have tried and used Launchable. Maybe any particular story that stood out for you that you can share with the audience here. How Launchable actually helped that customer to improve their productivity or their testing cycle.
Yeah, so I went to this conference in BaselCon. So the Basel is a build tool that came out of the Google. It's an incremental build test systems. So when people have this a massive software, they build and test takes a long time. So these people turn into these tools. Now, changing a build tool is a huge deal. It impacts everybody's working styles. So like I say, BaselCon is a place for all the users, I guess the key users of the Basel that comes together and then swap their nodes. So one of the presentation there was, the speaker was saying, oh, so in this company, we assign 4 engineers working on 2 years to take on this project, and we are almost done, but it's still going to take half a year or so. So I was shocked to hear, gosh, like he spent 8 man-years of of the good engineers. These good guys are normally like good engineers. And then you're still not done. And then the first guy who stood up to the question said, wow, that's amazing you did it so quickly. What was the trick? And I was like doubly shocked, like, what's going on here? This is not the time frame that I'm used to. So, and subsequently got in touch with those guys. And then they introduced us to another team inside the company. And so now we started working with those. So in some sense, like this is not either or. Most of the time, especially in established projects, these people are in between the rock and hard place. Have to keep things running every day. And then it's difficult to like incrementally squeeze a little bit more value, speed, like whatever out of it. Your test hardware combination, like they are doing embedded development. So tomorrow, like a new hardware type arrives, and like the test overload like increases, like multiplied. So they need this immediate help to get stuff under control so that they have cycles and oxygen to take on larger, longer projects. I think they see us as this kind of key ways to buy more time. Because when you're running a subset of tests, you don't really need to change anything fundamentally different. You don't need to spend 4 engineers working on 2 years before you start to see any benefit. So that was that experience. And there's like another, on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, there's a team of 2 engineers working on a web service, and their testing cycle is 20 minutes. So like a far cry from 1 hour unit test. But he was nonetheless still frustrated. 20 minutes is a difficult time. If I'm telling you that your next meeting is going to be in 20 minutes, what are you going to do? What can you do? It's too short to work on something new. So it's like adjusting this like a weird spot. So we were able to cut that down into, I think, 11 or 10 or something, basically half. So he really liked that. That creates this much rapid cycle. He doesn't need to context switch as much. He even said that allowed him to write more tests because like previously he was wary that every test he adds, it's going to add to the time. So that was a demotivator, but now he doesn't have it. So that was another great story for me.
So you have been dealing with this problem since, I think, last few years about software testing. So what do you think the future of software testing, like tools like this? I think this is probably one of a kind. I haven't heard such tool before. Like I know about Bazel incremental build, like it doesn't build the whole software. But to test only a subset of your test cases, I think it's still one of a kind. So what do you foresee the future of software testing going forward?
Yeah. So there's I think 2 things going on. The one is like ensuring quality became a lot bigger than testing. So at Sun, again, this 20 years ago, we were shipping packaged software. A lion's share of the quality came by running tests and making sure that things are good before you ship it. Now, for the most of the people, that's not how we ensure quality. I mean, testing is still a key pillar, but now we have other means like feature flags, controlling, doing a smarter rollout, using monitoring to flag the failures before too many customers get impacted. I feel like there's more defense in depth. There's all sorts of practice combined, like each of them designed to reduce the risk, accepting the fact that some bad stuff is going to happen. So I think there's a lot of that going on. More of that is going to happen. And then narrowly on the testing side, I think what needs to happen is focusing more on the increments. Again, Sun was in the business of selling this packaged software, and then we are releasing it every maybe once in 3 months, or major releases every once 2 years, and then minor release like every 6 months, and then patch release every month or something like that. I mean, that's kind of like a time frame we used to operate on. So then having a full test cycle that takes 2 weeks was kind of okay. Like it's painful, but it was manageable. If you're trying to ship every day, like deploy every day, you cannot possibly have a test 2 weeks. But the amount of tests that you amass could easily run up to those. So I think the way to make this work is, it's almost like movie frames. If you look at the reels, there's a 24 frames per second or something like that, right? One frame to the next is only going to change a little bit. But if you try to inspect every frame thoroughly, then you're not going to have enough time. Maybe you can do this like a 1 frame per second, not 24. So it really creates this natural upward limiting how frequent can you do. So I think the right thing to focus on is not to look at one frame in the movie, but look at 2 frames in the movie and compare the difference. Because if your speed goes up, the delta is going to go down. So I think that's the change that needs to happen. Some people are doing it crudely, like hotfix. There's a different process. Some teams have a different process for hotfixes, like this expedited lanes. That's like a very crude way of, well, the hotfix is small, so we should be able to do something small, put that into production. So it's the same thinking. I don't think that they are doing it consciously, but that needs to be more embraced and become more daily routines.
Yeah, I mean, like hotfix, yeah, I must admit, I also have this kind of high-speed lane where you probably you don't write the whole test. Sometimes even you are so confident that you just deploy it like in whatever way. So I can see definitely with tools like this, and hopefully in the future, more and more such tools available, we can improve this kind of hacky way of doing the software deployment. So I think that will be great, definitely. So I saw another talk that you gave maybe a few months ago. It's about data-driven DevOps, right?
Yeah.
So what do you mean by data-driven here?
I mean, I talked a little bit about how like we should go from manual transmission to automatic to continuous variable transmission. So my thesis is by and large, the way people put together the delivery process is by gut and instinct. So how do you go up from there? I think the next step up from there is to use the data that comes out of the system to help you make the right decisions. Is this test failure flaky? And then the experienced person who's been with project for long already knows that, oh, sometimes it fails in that way. So it's a tribal knowledge. When I say data-driven DevOps, I mean like don't rely on this human experience and let the system tell you. We should be able to find that kind of information from data. So that's fun. And then I gave like a few stories of how the real world team was able to do something seemingly very small and easy and still managed to get a lot of value out of these efforts. There was one example of a guy doing a regular expression pattern matching on the last X lines of build log. The regular expression, of course, that has to be like the tool that we bring in. Oh, it's almost got this like a smell of a duct tape solution right from the beginning. So depending on how stuff failed, if the infrastructure failed, if the CI build testing infrastructure failed, then you want to notify the CI team. If the failure is due to the application code or the test failures, you're going to notify the application developers. And then like nothing is worse for the CI team, for the app developers to get notified of a failure of the CI team because it really hurts their credibility. So he wanted to defend his own fame against this. And that was really effective. I can totally see that. So those are like a great example in my mind about how you're using data to make a little bit improvements here and there. So I'm not trying to talk about like a number of pull requests per day, story points. I'm sure those are good for some things, but that's not what I mean. But it's more the tactical improvements we can do. So that's the kind of story behind data-driven DevOps.
So for those kind of scenarios, then how would you actually collect the data? Because yeah, it's not integrated most likely into our tools, into our software development. So how would you track all these data and actually use that to do this retrospection and also improve in the future?
Yeah, so luckily, we are not the only people who are suffering from the data problem. The whole world is going through the quote-unquote the big data thing. And so there's a lot of people building these, getting data from whatever, marketing, sales, etc., customer interactions, and then try to extract useful knowledge out of it. So this is a well-traded space, lots of BI solutions. And I've seen a number of teams over the last decade, they built their in-house solutions. You can spot those. Those are like a dime a dozen. Now, if you ask me, then this might sound a little selfish, but that smells like back in the days where every company was building their own CI system because they needed it. But it takes time, and trust me, you don't want to do it. So I think that's a sign for me, like this more general solution needs to appear. So that's part of the motivation of me doing Launchable. It's clearly like this is a universal problem, and the people are solving it on their own. We should be able to do better than that.
So for people who would like to learn and use Launchable, is there some kind of a free tier? Where do they play it? Actually, I don't know how to run this Launchable. You mentioned there's a CLI. Is it like running on local?
Yeah, so if you go to launchableinc.com, you can sign up and get the API key within 15 seconds. And then there's public documentations. And as I said, you only do 3 things in your CI script to get this going. And it's free for open source project. It's also free for small teams. And then I'm trying to work on building like a playable demo. Because the thing is, like, before you can start seeing the impact in your project, it takes a little bit of time for data to amass. So I have this like a toy project. The idea is like, you go ahead and create a pull request to this toy project, and we'll show you that it's going to pick up the right test.
So I'm sure it will be great if it's integrated to open source project and you can see over the time, actually, because open source normally has a lot of contribution, especially the most popular one, of course. Probably it's a good way to demo the capability of the Launchable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Kohsuke, thank you so much for your time. Before we end the conversation, normally I would ask one question for all my guests, which is about 3 technical leadership wisdom for all the listeners to listen from. What kind of advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so this was an interesting question that made me pause a little bit. I think most technical leaders, their starting point is like a leadership by code. That was the case for me. You just write the better code more quickly, and that's like how you influence people around you. And that's great, but it actually only carries you so far. You might be able to do it like a 3 times better, or maybe 10x better. But by the time you need to influence 10 people, like your 10x better coding skill, it's become a wash. So I felt like I struggled a lot from jumping from that to the next. So I think recognizing that's fundamentally not a scalable enough ways to make a difference. I think that's one. And 2, I often describe people as like a sphere of influence. So the way as a technical leader, you influence other engineers around you is, you make an impact by influencing people around you. In some sense, they don't really need you. They get things done in their own ways. So what is the value that you can add? One thing that I gravitated there is like a power of storytelling. At one point in Cloudbees, I made it my job to go out to the software development teams and talk to how they do things and their struggles, and I create a story, almost like a portrait of their lives. And then I bring it back to the company. The idea here is I want to help you mentally picture whose problem you're solving, and then also hoping to get you excited in solving those people's problems. If you can see your customer's picture, it's always better than like trying to help the abstract set of people. That's the power of storytelling, and I'd like to think it made some impact, and then changes how people do things a little bit differently. And that's like all you can hope for. But those things are much more scalable. Like I can write this one piece in a few hours and it gets read by 200 people. So coding, it's difficult, but the writing more so. Presentation, similar. And then along similar lines, I started thinking about empowering more individuals. So you're trying to do something by yourself is useful, but again, it only scales so much. At some sides of the organizations, like it becomes more efficient to spot people who are trying to do the right thing, and then send more spotlight and resources, and I can tell people like, okay, this guy is doing awesome things. Let's help them. So that I find to be somewhat rewarding too, but more effective. Those are the things that I felt like it's worthwhile to think about.
Those are pretty good. I really like the storytelling part, and also like putting the spotlight for good behaviors that you want to promote within your team. I think that really resonates with me as well. So thanks, Kohsuke, for this lovely chat. So if people wants to find you online, they want to connect with you or learn more about this Launchable product, maybe where can they find you online?
Yeah, so kohsuke.org is my website, and there are all the kind of key links available. Launchableinc.com is our company website. I'm there on Twitter, Facebook, etc. The same is the company. And Jenkins is also, well. So yeah, that's how you can find me.
So thanks, Kohsuke. I wish you good luck with Launchable. Hopefully one day I will be able to play around with it as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and then looking forward to going back to Singapore at some point.
All right, cool. Then we'll see you by then. Thank you for listening to this episode and for staying right till the end. If you highly enjoyed, please share it with your friends and colleagues who you think would also benefit from listening to this episode. And if you're new to the podcast, make sure to subscribe and leave me your valuable review and feedback. It really helps me a lot in order to grow this podcast better. You can also find the full show notes of this conversation on the episode page at techleadjournal.dev website, including the full transcript, interesting quotes and links to the resources and mentions from the conversation. And lastly, make sure to subscribe to the show's mailing list on techleadjournal.dev to get notified for any future episodes. Stay tuned for the next Tech Lead Journal episode, and until then, goodbye.